Okay, we are properly into the summer now. We've gone through one transfer window of two that we have this summer, and helping me sift through the wreckage of it today is going to be Hayden Van Brewer. How you going, man?
Yeah, doing really well, Patrick. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good. It's good to see you here. Look, transfer season is starting to get exciting. I hope people are at least doing stuff. I feel like sometimes in the transfer window we sit here for 2 weeks saying, "Yeah, it looks like there's going to be a lot of movement at the end of the window." But this time, Man City have already brought in three players, and they're trying to shift guys too. Everybody's looking at strikers. The Club World Cup deadline, kind of artificial deadline, has meant that we've seen some aggressive negotiations. So today we're going to look at some players for teams around the Premier League and beyond. But the guy we're going to start with might be on his way out of Manchester City, and that's Jack Grealish. City want to move him on. I think they've left him out of the squad for the Club World Cup, but he's got 2 years left on his deal. He's 30 in the autumn. Where do they even start with this? Because he's a big drag on the wage bill, right? And they've got to try and move him one way or another.
Yeah, I think in terms of Manchester City season, it's been a little bit Goldilocks and the Three Bears, where it feels like maybe Doku had the speed and explosiveness, but maybe not quite the end product. Savino was the young one, a bit inconsistent around the
Hmm.
edges. And Jack Grealish is sort of the most established pro of the group, known Premier League quantity, but maybe didn't have that sort of explosiveness to frequently change games, even if he maybe had the perceived best end product and quality of the group. I think injuries have also played a part a little bit, but yeah, I think it's a tricky one for City. He's on a very big wage package, and in terms of what he's done, he's not been a guy that's really in the shop window. I think
Mm.
for suitors of Jack Grealish, you're looking at older footage and older data to really evaluate the player as opposed to what you've seen right before your very eyes in the last sort of 6 months or so.
Hmm. Yeah, that is the thing. We're looking at a guy here who's got, I think, 890s in the Premier League this last season, 1190s in the Premier League the season before. In fact, City over the life of this deal, I tried to cost it up today because 300k a week is a little over 15 million a year. Over the life of his deal so far, City have spent about 162 million pounds. That's transfer fee and wages. They've only had 157 appearances out of him. So they've paid slightly over a million per appearance. And yeah, they could end up paying out this contract until 2027. So right now, there is rumored interest. Apparently, Everton might be interested. Apparently, Leverkusen are interested in him. That's not going to happen unless you can get his wage down to 25% of what it is now. But it would be nice to see some more of him. Of course, he had that first season at City where he got a lot of criticism and looked like he was settling in. Then in the second season, he was integral to the treble win and in a different way. You know, at Villa, obviously everything went through him and he had a lot of end product. And actually the end product went down quite a bit at City. Now, you were saying off air before we started, it's quite hard to figure out what you're going to be getting if you sign Jack Grealish.
Yeah, I think when we talk about that change in his game, Jack Grealish became a much better defender. I
Mm-hmm.
think he's uh, maybe doesn't have this reputation, but from people I know, kind of working around the club and things like that, the reputation as a player who has a lot of detail in his game and is willing to put the time to watch video and really analyze opponents, and I think spend the
Okay.
time on his own game. And I think he improved defensively in a really big way, where he was very willing to come down low and defend and really be resilient deeper in the field instead of being sort of the playmaker that just sits up high and waits for the ball to come to him before he comes alive. And I think because of that, you saw him really gain utility for City and improve his standing there and able to do things that made him really valuable. At the same time, you're wondering, does that mean he really is a bit pigeonholed in that wider area, which is maybe not ideal as he kind of crosses into his 30s?
Hmm.
Where you maybe want to transition him to being that sort of free 8 or 10 that can help you get up the field and bring other people into attack. You're maybe a little bit worried about him because you've seen him so good in that defensive role, but then you're not sure if he's going to lose some of the athleticism out wide that you probably want in those roles nowadays.
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I can see the appeal of, of him. he's a guy who we've seen be outstanding. You expect that if City want to move him on this summer, they're going to need to probably eat some of his wages and take very, very little in fee. It's one of those things where if he moves, I can imagine that what we hear is that the fee is quite healthy, but actually City are probably taking a pretty substantial bath on the wages. You know, if he goes to Everton, I can imagine them saying, oh, they paid 30 mil for him, but maybe City are paying 2/3 of his wages over the next couple of years. But if you are a team like that, and I'm not saying I would do this for Everton because I definitely wouldn't. But if you are a team like that, you can see the appeal, I suppose, of saying, here is a player who we have known to be great at different points. And there are things in his numbers that are still really exciting. Like his whole career, he's been an amazing zone mover. His progressive carry numbers have been outstanding, like top 1% in the world at Villa and at City. He's still an excellent progressive passer for his position. He's an excellent outlet, actually. He's good at receiving those passes high up. And he's been creative as well. The downside is, can he do that stuff while he's doing the defensive stuff, or does the defensive stuff have to go? And he's also not a big shot volume guy, you know. But I think if your team has a lot of off-ball runners, desperately needs creativity, and has a rangy, athletic midfield that can cover for him, I can kind of understand wanting to take the risk, you know. So I was trying to think who would be an interesting fit for him. And I did think I would be interested to see Newcastle go for him. I don't think they will, to be clear. But we've talked about Newcastle and how they look at their best in those games where a team comes out at them and expects to have all the ball, and Newcastle can gum up the midfield and make life horrible for them. But when they're up against another tough side, another physical side, against a deep block, they don't really have that creative magic. And it would be interesting if, even just as a rotation player, if they could bring on Grealish with Bruno, Tonali, Joelinton to cover for them, and then another winger plus Gordon plus Isak ahead of him. In that situation, that's the one where I think, yeah, maybe I could kind of see something cooking there, but you'd want to do it in such a way that it was not a huge financial risk, right?
Yeah, I think for Newcastle, it's sort of like the squad composition maybe makes it not make as much sense to me in
Okay.
terms of how important Harvey Barnes was sort of towards the
Yeah,
end of
that's
the
true.
year. I actually I don't hit the fit, especially in terms of how Newcastle defend a lot, and kind of that flat three midfield. I think is really stable and athletic, and maybe gives them some options there. The one that I kind of had in mind was Bournemouth. I love that
Mm.
Bournemouth sort of plays with Clauvert as that sort of pressing winger who's now inside playing as a number 10 kind of role.
Mm-hmm.
Saw that sort of deployed a little bit in an interesting way for the Netherlands just the other day. I kind of wonder if having a more established and athletic number 10 in the midfield allows Grealish to sort of defend in that 4-4-2 shape, which I think he's shown to be really good in at City, and then still get the most of his sort of ball playing, because you have an extra midfielder that's sort of a constant runner and threat and attack. That's
Mm-hmm.
not just dropping in and getting the ball to feet, which Grealish is going to look for. So I think there are teams that are a fit, but it's looking for a team that's the fit both sides of the ball that gets a little bit tricky, and then
Yeah.
also has the sort of investment to take that risk on the player sort of at the wages and what he's saying. I totally agree with you, by the way, with what you're saying in terms of the outgoing transfer fee, or whether he's a Jadon Sancho loan obligation to
Mm-hmm.
buy type multi-year structured out deal to sort of, kind of take it out of being an embarrassing one for City, because I think the price they paid puts pressure on them, at least in the media. But I think they also are going to want to do right by a player, because he was an integral part to their team, and it sort of looks like he's being shifted out as the whole team is changing. Really,
Yeah.
there's so much movement at City right now. It's sort of like a cost of doing business a little bit.
It is a sad one, though, because you do think that what they're losing in De Bruyne this season, it does feel like Grealish should be able to cover some of that. You know, that young De Bruyne quality of being able to burst through the midfield. Like, Grealish may still have a little bit of that in his locker. I mean, that's kind of why you could imagine if, for example, if Palace, I don't know whether they have an agreement with Eberechi, but if they do have an agreement that he can leave at a certain price, and it got triggered late on in the window, then you could imagine them thinking, oh, okay, well, maybe then Grealish is the like for like ish guy that we can get for much less money. Like that's the kind of thing I would like to see, where it feels like there's kind of a situation set up for somebody like him already. But yeah, I love the Leverkusen rumor, right? Like if you're losing Florian Wirtz, who can create in all the ways possible, then Grealish is an interesting kind of shape to fill that hole. But yeah, my worry is that this is one that's just going to drag on till the end of the summer, and maybe right at the end, maybe an Italian team takes a risk or something. But again, it's going to require something pretty funky on wages, I think. I would
Yeah,
I would like to see him play
I'm
there.
Yeah, I'm also kind of with that. I think Leverkusen with Ten Hag coming in probably knows the player pretty well, has a good awareness of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Leverkusen are going to shift a lot of things so that there's sort of a lot of flexibility there. I think it makes it a little hard for us to comment exactly how good a fit it is.
Mm.
But I think in terms of like the deal itself, the player coming in, some sort of limited risk with either a loan or City covering a lot of wages probably makes sense for them. They've got the ability to spend it, and they probably want to try to take a couple different avenues with that Verts fee to try to replace that throughout the team and try different things. So
Mm.
I'd be excited to see something like that. But yeah, I'm not exactly sure how that's going to shake out. I think just this is probably a good point to touch on this throughout the window, is that like at the start of the window, the Club World Cup has really accelerated things. I think
Yeah.
it's really fun as fans when we're getting new signings getting done and across the line. We're seeing teams start to really reconfigure themselves, and we can start to try to picture what they're going to look like next year. That's not often how these things look, because the time pressure of the negotiation is really important. Often these transfers end up being sort of trickle down, where a team moves a player and now they've got need, and now that money's going to be spent elsewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
As it kind of moves, and then as the window closes, there's more and more momentum to get deals done, get players across the line, and that's when things sort of kick into a little bit of a frenzy. And I think it's important to sort of think that there are definitely teams, especially teams that are really established, that are going to wait towards later in the window, that have their eyes on guys that are saying, well, look, we're not going to come in and pay the fee that Liverpool are playing for Verts, because
Sure.
Liverpool are probably thinking, we've paid for Van Dijk and Salah. Like, we've got to get things done right now. If we
Mm-hmm.
really believe
Mm-hmm.
in these guys, it's time to get things really to go for it, right? Some of these teams, I think in particular, I've got my eyes on Arsenal and seeing like what a
Mm-hmm.
team like that might do a little bit later in the window, as maybe some of this money gets spent, and as a team, let's say like Leverkusen, they start to really go, okay, well, we really need this guy. Maybe they're looking between two, and then that second guy is available for a little bit of a cheaper fee right after that, because the team actually goes, look, we actually still want a fee for this guy.
Mm.
So I think that's something that we're going to have to kind of constantly look at as we talk about these players, is when might they be available in the window, and what are the other factors that could lead to them being bought or sold at different times.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking about this today, actually, because it looks like Leroy Sané has agreed this deal with Galatasaray, right, for an absolutely insane fee. It's like 50 mil a year. Well, he's not going to get that at a Premier League side or a top Italian side, but he is the kind of player who, if he was available late in the window, you could imagine teams thinking, maybe another little bit of depth there available. Maybe we do overpay a bit like Arsenal going for Sterling at the end of the window last year. These are guys to keep an eye on, the players who teams want to shift. Yeah. So I don't know. We'll see where Grealish goes. It'd be good to see him play his last bit of football in his 20s, because we've lost a couple of years here, and he was a very exciting player at his peak. The question will be where it ends up being. Okay, we finished up in Germany there, kind of. So shall we stay there with Hugo Ekitike, one of the many strikers on the market this summer? A lot of fawning coverage of him right now, including in our own newsletter, where Kim got very excited about him. And rightly so. He is exciting, right? I wouldn't say he's the best striker on the market, but he is one of the most talented, I think. The breadth of what he can do. He has some of that winger skill set as well. Should we start by talking a little bit about the player, and then we can talk about where he might fit?
Yeah, I think in terms of the player itself, you see this sort of unicorn athletic profile.
Mm,
He's tall, he's pretty fast, he has a pretty good skill set with his feet. Like
mm,
he's not just a guy that's in the box and showing up at the back post and trying to head things, and his assists only come from playing things back across. Like this is a guy that was flexible to play around Marmoush, who was really kind of the star of the show at the start of the season for the Eintracht Frankfurt team. And so
mm,
I think with Ekitike, part of what gets people so excited is that he clearly has some superlative athletic traits, but that he also has sort of the flexibility to fit around other star players that can create for him, but that he can also bring into the game. I think he's a guy that does that really with his technical ability as opposed to just like movement, constantly making runs or doing something like that. Like I think he's if we're going to compare him a little bit to Erling Haaland, who also has this superlative
mm.
physical profile, the Ekitike is a guy that's not necessarily doing it by just these bull runs in behind, and if you find him, no one can keep up with him. He's doing it by he's maybe not dropping into midfield. That's where Marmoush was. But if you can find him to feet, he has the ability to link up and create with other people and bring them into the game. And I think that combined with some of his traits like his speed and some of his size make him a really interesting prospect for a number of top teams.
Yeah, but the thing is though, the difference between him and Haaland, right? I mean the goal numbers and the expected goal numbers are kind of right there. Last season, 22 non-penalty goal involvements in the Bundesliga off 26 non-penalty expected goals and assists, which is crazy. He was at like 0.9 per 90. Um, but he's not very strong. You can't really rely on him to pin defenders. And it does feel like if he were to go to a side which compresses space, where he'd expect to be up against two centre backs on the edge of the box with loads of congestion around them, you do wonder what he'd be able to do there, because right now he doesn't have the strength. And despite his height, you wonder if, in order to bulk him up to get him to compete with centre backs, how much of the explosiveness would you lose? How much of that exciting mobility would you lose? And he is a guy who's largely played he played in a front two, obviously, with Marmoush, and then he has played up top by himself and in a three over the back half of the season. But yeah, you want him getting the ball, receiving the ball in space and driving at defenders. So I think Kim said that she thought about him as a good candidate for Liverpool. He's also been linked to Chelsea. To me, Chelsea doesn't make sense at all for these reasons. He's not going to have a lot of space there. They're going to make things a bit like stodgy. I just like he makes smart runs, and Jackson makes smart runs, and that's quite a difficult pair of guys to mark. But I just wonder if he's capable of occupying centre backs enough to play for Chelsea.
I think Chelsea is one where, like, if he had come in instead of
Mm,
Jackson, which again, this is all unrealistic because it's like where he's at now when Jackson came in, right?
sure.
I think if something like that happened where Nkunku was playing off him, then you can kind of start to see it as sort of, again, a bit of a front pair.
Sure.
And Nkunku's this, like, second striker, maybe more than Cole Palmer's, like, a real attacking midfielder number 10. I agree with that. I think with Cole Palmer, it's maybe not the same right fit. He'd maybe get some of the service, but I think he likes having other players to combine with. And that's part of what makes him so good, is that he is a player that can carry the ball at speed, bring it up the field in transition. He's a guy that can link up with other people. And yeah, I would agree with that. I think it makes a little bit of less sense now. I think with having players like Verts and Sala coming underneath him and around him, I think a player like Alexi McAllister is someone who would just find Ekitike defeat like from everywhere.
Hmm.
That's sort of how
Hmm.
I picture it with Liverpool. The price of the problem for Liverpool is a little bit the price, right?
Sure.
It's sort of like if they've spent so much on Verts, can they also do that on Ekitike? Which again feels a little bit like if they haven't moved Darwin and they haven't gotten the Saudi money for Louis Diaz, then maybe that's not really feasible. That has to be a later in the window one, because otherwise the fee that's being quoted around 80 million, I think is
Yeah.
really, really high.
Yeah. That takes you up to like a quarter billion on your attack, without even getting into the defense. But as a player, you like that he would get to use his creativity. He'd get to go out wide, especially if he was playing with someone like Jota, You can imagine them interchanging quite nicely. And with Salah, you don't want him parked out wide. Like, it does make sense. I also think I could see him. Spurs aren't going to do it because they obviously got Solanke last year, but that'd be interesting because they're bringing in a transition coach, and they've got guys like Brennan Johnson who kind of need a facilitating striker to get much out of them. Or United, who are bringing in / have brought in transition attacking talent. And again, you can imagine if you had a front line of Ekitike, Cunha, and Mbeumo, that's a lot of money. But those three guys, as a set of skills, work together quite nicely, I think.
It's a much better fit for what Amorim's been like trying to do, I think. Like the challenges with Man United have always been the like spending money and decision making around the squad building and not around those profiles. Like I think you can really picture those two guys underneath and Ekitike combining and interchanging in a good way. I think that makes sense, even though the price also does not really totally fit what they need to do right now.
Yeah, but we like the player, and shot volume is the one bit that I really like here, because we often see players out of the Bundesliga who put up good expected goal numbers and good pressing numbers and all this kind of stuff, but you do quite often get these guys in the Bundesliga who are at like 2 shots a game, but the crazy high quality because they're running in behind a lot. Ekitike is at like 4 shots a game. And he was at 4 shots a game last season when he had crappy shot quality. Then this season, the shot quality improved and he retained the volume. That to me is pretty interesting stuff. He's just 23. He was also pretty good at rounds. Didn't quite work out for him at PSG. I really hope he gets a move this summer because I would like to see him play. But if I were Chelsea, I personally would not do it.
It feels like the bit we've been saying all summer is there's really interesting striker profiles that you'd love to see teams fit around. But because there's so few really top tier options, the prices for all of them are ones where you have to go almost all in on. And that's sort of left us in a spot where a lot of these strikers are still sort of sitting around waiting to see what happened. Again, Gyökeres, Osimhen, Ekitike, etc. So I think that's probably going to continue. If there's a trend of this, is that we'll keep mentioning these names as hopeful for teams that need strikers, but ultimately, again, they'd have to take the jump that sort of Spurs made with Solanke. Like, this is our guy, and we're really doing this, and we're committing a lot for a number of years to this guy. And I think, at least at this point in the summer, maybe teams aren't quite ready to do that yet, or haven't wrapped their heads around it a little bit.
We need one of them to go. It feels like, Romano says that Arsenal are negotiating with Leipzig for Šeško. If they went and got that done, then you can imagine other teams saying, oh, hang on. Oh, okay, right. Well, then we better go and do Gyökeres now before everybody goes. And then we might see the dominoes fall really quickly. But yeah, at the moment, again, to use Arsenal as an example, again, supposedly they're negotiating for Gyökeres and Šeško. That feels like exactly the situation everybody's in. Every single striker on the market, you're negotiating for simultaneously. And then at some point, somebody's just going to have to go for it. And then we might have a bit of a rush on.
Whoever does it, it's like the pool opening for the summer. It feels like
exactly.
Once one of these strikers moves, the real transfer flow party can start at that point.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, next up we've got Jobe Bellingham. It's genuinely, I know we were talking about it off air, but it's genuinely hard not to say Joby when I see it written down. He's gone to Borussia Dortmund for 27 mil. 19 years old, already has over 7,000 minutes in the championship, so he's very experienced for his age. Going to Dortmund makes sense. They're very good at developing young talent. He knows the club a little bit, obviously, through his brother. I do wonder if it's going to do him any favors, though, in that he is going to be compared to his brother quite a lot. I mean, I guess that's maybe always going to happen, but he is a different sort of player.
Yeah, I think the comparisons are always going to happen. I don't think that's avoidable. And he's, I think, actively pushed against that throughout his whole career.
Sure.
I think I've seen the player develop a lot with the move to Sunderland. I think when he got there, he was a bit more sort of free, attacking midfielder kind of type in that sort of vein. And this year for Sunderland, they sort of sat a bit deeper, 4-4-2, transition based. And he was one of those sixes that was a bit more robust, a bit more physical, took on a lot of defensive responsibility. Like, I think defended his box really well, something that's always exciting for a young midfielder to do, because it's not very sexy, but it's so important. And then would show, I would say, like glimpses of that sort of getting in the box late, getting on the ends of things, and being a presence in that way. And I think because he's showed both sides of that, that's part of what makes him so exciting here for Dortmund, that could use some extra energy in their midfield from a defensive side, but will still be one of the hopefully be competing at the top half of the Bundesliga, and will need to get extra bodies in the box, and he can be a really good one for that. So it's a big fee. Again, the sort of nepotism angle, I think, is something people will maybe complain about, but I actually like the player. I like the player. I like the fit for Dortmund. I think he can really add something interesting. And I'm really happy with how he's improved his game. He looks to be continuing to add things to his game, and not just from a physical standpoint. I think he's really an intelligent player that can add a lot to them.
Yeah, he's the season before last. That was where he had some really exciting stats, like kind of as a box crasher, right? And he's got such a big frame that he is always going to be a danger in that regard. But yeah, this deeper move does seem to have rounded him out in lots of ways. Like his progressive passing is trending up, his dribble success and dribble volume going up at the same time. Like defensively, he's not a high volume guy, so there you're more betting on coachability, right, and maybe instincts rather than just like him putting up volume at a young age. But you won't want to play him too high up. Like I think that when you think about him having that more attacking role early on, the numbers there don't quite make sense. Like he can be dangerous running into the box, but like he doesn't have the creativity or something right now anyway that justifies that higher position. But I like him as a central midfielder. I think that this is a really interesting one, and he is still a teenager. It's funny that we've had people like his brother, as well as I suppose people like Camavinga and now Desiree Doué. They've really altered our perception of what it's reasonable to expect from a teenager. He's putting up very solid minutes in a tough division as a teenager. It kind of makes sense for Dortmund to take a risk on him, though it's quite pricey for them.
Yeah, certainly. I do also think with Dortmund, they do have a number of these sort of more creative passing type attacking midfielders. Like Gio Reyna is still kicking around
Oh my
there.
God.
Julian Brandt is a player that I think they'll probably want to try to get the most out of in the next little period, as sort of maybe their guy that is playing that pass in the final third to unlock things or delivering the ball. And I think Bellingham frees him up a little bit in that regard, takes away some of the striding out defensive responsibility, the physical challenging. And I think Bellingham will, at least initially, if things sort of look how I think they'll look right now, he'll be a guy that's sort of carrying the ball forward and bringing the ball into the attack to then get it to these guys to make that sort of playmaking happen. And then if play slows down, he'll be your late arriver in the box from an attacking standpoint.
He and Mecha is quite an interesting pairing. Like that's a pretty good like do everything midfield, and a nice base, yeah, for a creative player like Brandt above that. Okay, so we've talked about some names here that people know, even if they maybe don't know them too well in some cases. But it's nice to have a name that is new, right? Like that's one of the exciting things about looking into transfers, finding people who you've never heard of before, but are just absolutely tearing it up. And Brighton have spent 34 million, or are spending 34 million, to bring in Greek attacker Charalampos Kostoulas from Olympiakos. He's an 18-year-old. He's like kind of he's a striker really, but I know as well he's had attacking midfield minutes. He won the UEFA Youth League with Olympiakos in 2024, which was actually a pretty great run because they beat Inter Milan, they beat Bayern, they beat Lens, who obviously normally have good youth talent. They beat Milan on their way to winning it. So quite impressive pedigree here. And now he's been playing in the Super League this season. This is an interesting one, right? He's an interesting profile, and Brighton spending this much money on an 18-year-old out of Greece feels like they spent a lot last summer, but this feels like a sea change in Brighton's approach.
100%. I think we would have probably said on this pod all year, if Brighton are spending money on a player, like take notice. They're a good team to watch. They're doing smart things. They keep improving their standing year over year. This is like a bigger swing than most. The player isn't like 18, but he just turned 18 like a week ago. This player
Yeah.
was 17 all year. And I think in terms of the profiling, the thing that's interesting about the player and about Brighton is he feels like not too distantly similar to a little bit about what they've looked at in Ruter and a little bit about what they've looked at in Joao Pedro. That this is like an attacker that does a lot of different things well, and you're not sure exactly how he's going to fit into the team, like what shape is best for him. Is he a striker fit that does a little bit extra? Is he an attacking midfielder that sort of gets the ball and wants to run at people and drift out wide at times and do different things? He's a little bit of a lot of things. When I've watched the player in the bits that I've seen, you see a guy that could be maybe a winger for a bit in his career as he continues to develop, could be a bit of a 10 or second striker, could just play as a number 9 if he's got other pieces moving around him. He's very athletic. I think maybe that's a good starting point, is that he does look like a player that has already made the transition to men's football very, very well. Like, I think even in men's football, he will be very, very fast. He looks already like a really athletic player in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of a question of more a positional fit, but also I think with this player, there's hopefully an expectation that this is a little bit of a development project, that in a year or two, you could have a guy that really is doing crazy things. And I think that's what's reflected in the fee, more so than necessarily what the player did at age 17. And the fact that he was doing it at 17 for a big fish in a smaller pond with Olympiacos, that they're saying, we're ready to maybe take this project to a different level, and he's the guy that is going to help us do that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, because I mean, it's not an unphysical league, the Greek league, and he stood out athletically even there. You know, like you say, he does look quick, but he's also just racking up headers, like loads of goals this season from headers. And if you look at his shot map, it's all just circles, you know, all over the place, as well as some through ball stuff as well. But his pressing numbers also pop. His shot numbers pop overall. He gets a load of touches in the box. He gets fouled a ton. Like, there's loads and loads and loads of stuff here in a guy who's also 6'1" at just 18 years old. Like, that is really interesting. The only question here is, okay, they clearly intend to sell Joao Pedro, and they were probably open to selling Mitoma maybe in January. But they've got Stefanos Tsimas arriving this summer. They bought him in January and loaned him back to, it was Nuremberg, I think. They paid 20 mil for him. And their forward depth right now, they've got Pedro Enciso, Adingra Ruta, Minter Welbeck, Mitoma, Evan Ferguson, Facundo Buonanotte, Stefanos Tsimas, and now Kostoulas. And they paid over 30 mil for 4 of those. They paid over 20 mil for like 5 or 6 of those. It's an expensive set of players. It's a really exciting group of players, but I have no idea like who they expect to use and where they expect to use them, really.
Yeah, I think that's all right. Like, I think there's generally a feeling that maybe the midfield is a bit more settled with, if I haven't heard rumors that Baliba's leaving, so it feels like Baliba and O'Reilly is going to be sort of the base of this sort of team.
And Ayari, plus Ayari, you know.
Yeah, right. And Ayari as well. And so it sort of feels like that bit is settled. Like, they're pretty comfortable in there. But when you just listed that group of players, there's a lot of different ways they could play, that they could line up. And again, I think Brighton are a team that will show flexibility, but even just like, how is this all being pinned together and how are these players being grouped is a little bit of an open question. And maybe that's the biggest concern, because I think there's a feeling with Kostoulas that he could come in and fill a number of these roles, but so could a lot of these guys. And you're going to want him to come in and have a role in this team. Hopefully, if you're paying that kind of fee, even if it's not the main man, you're going to want him to have a key role to keep developing and help him fulfill the potential that he's got.
Mm-hmm. But if 2 of these guys turn into stars, and it's not that crazy for 2 of them to turn into stars, you know, like there are players here that we really love. then they could be really dangerous. They're like a smart Chelsea with a quarter of the money. Like that's what it feels like they're doing now. Just absolutely stockpiling talent and thinking, well, we'll produce something out of this, and probably you can sell some of these cast-offs. Like if they wanted to move on Adingra or Buonanotte, they could probably move them on for reasonable fees this summer. So maybe we should expect that to happen too. And I guess
think that's the tricky one here is some of these guys probably do need to be moved on.
Mm-hmm.
And which guys are they going to kind of sit on and say, you know what, let's see for one more year. This guy could maybe do a slightly different role now that we've shuffled things around. But I'm not sure. Like, again, is Evan Ferguson coming back to kind of play a main role? It feels like the loan to West Ham was sort of maybe not good for anybody. Didn't really clear things up for Brighton. It wasn't super effective for West Ham, and the player is maybe a little bit more in limbo right now. Like I think it's a really important preseason for Brighton. And I really wonder when we get that going, if there's a possibility that sort of towards the back end of the window that they're really trying to shuffle some of these guys out to just give themselves a space. And even again, I think Ted's done a great job about talking about how important playing time is as a resource for these teams. That couldn't be more true for a team like Brighton. Like getting these guys on the field, getting them playing together, getting them feeling good. That's what gets these guys the value if they want to sell these guys, or will help Brighton achieve their team goals of pushing further up in the table. And so how they do that strategically is really, really important. We'll kind of see there's so many options right now, and Kostoulas doesn't really clarify that, right? It's not like they signed a player that's going to be nailed on center striker starting 25, 30 of their Premier League games. And then now we'll start to piece it around that. It's like, this is a guy that kind of raises more questions about the group project. Even I think we can see what they're trying to do here. We're just wondering, how do they manage the group to get the most out of this transfer and these other transfers that they brought in?
Yeah, I think that missing out on European football has been is quite a big problem for Brighton when it comes to getting development minutes for these guys. I think after the money they spent last summer, they maybe had a fairly reasonable expectation that they could get it. So certainly it feels like Hürzeler gets this season, but unless he makes a pretty significant advance on where he ended up last year, I think Brighton might be looking to upgrade him next.
It's a hot seat position, and there's a lot to be excited about, but it's a really key season for Brighton. It feels like they're sort of one of these teams that have gotten, I don't want to say a free pass, but that everyone has just sort of been like, yeah, they're good, they're getting better. Like that's just what they're doing right now. And right now it sort of feels like there's some problems to solve there. And if they could do it, it could be really exciting, but the pressure's on.
Okay, so thank you for joining me, Hayden, for this trip around European football. We've actually touched on quite a few leagues here. I think, don't want to congratulate ourselves too much, but, we've done the air miles today. Where can people check in with you before we see you again?
Yeah, I'm at H. Van Brewer on Blue Sky, and I'll be keeping an eye on these transfers all summer. And we're also heading into the Club World Cup, so I'm excited that we'll be having that in the United States and seeing what that looks like. I think it could be a really exciting tournament.
Sure. The football just doesn't stop this year. And the transfer flow doesn't stop either. We'll be back on the podcast on Monday with the Chelsea rebuild. I say with trepidation because I've got to get my head around about 50 players in order to do that one. But do check in on that. And obviously we'll be covering more and more clubs as the season goes on. We'll also have written previews once we get into the summer proper. Thank you very much for listening or watching. We'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.